Hey folks, Randy Newberg here with another episode of Leupold's Hunt Talk Radio. We started recording some of these for video, so those of you watching this, you're going to be like, wow, actual video. For those of you listening, you probably aren't going to get a chance to watch it, but appreciate all of you tuning in and listening, following along, whether you're watching the video one or you're listening to the download one. Today we have a really cool guest, person I've known now for I think 4 years, who is responsible for me getting into hunting and shooting with a suppressed rifle. Little did I know when I first encountered him, he's such a modest guy. People introduced me, I'm like, who is that guy? But Brandon Maddox, founder of Silencer Central, he and I continue to touch base, bump into each other, visit, talk, and they're now one of the partners that we have for the podcast. Some of you probably heard some of their ads, but it's because of them that I got to the point where I shoot a suppressed rifle all the time, unless I'm in, say, a place like Canada where they're not legal. And I regret that I grew up with a culture that was you just don't do that. And suppressors were really hard to find back in the day, but even hearing protection seemed optional. Now I think this upcoming year will be my fourth season hunting with a suppressed rifle, and I will never hunt without a suppressed rifle again. And I know that I sound almost missionary in my zeal about hunting with a suppressed rifle. Have since I started doing it because I realized how beneficial it is, for a lot of reasons, and I'm sure Brandon and I'll talk about those. But if you're like me and you have compromised hearing, especially in your left ear, it's a huge frustration. It's probably one of my greatest frustrations in life is having this ear that doesn't work the way I want it to. People talk to me and I'm like, what? What? And it's all because of shooting. An audiologist quickly identified, oh, you must shoot right handed. I can tell by where you have this huge gap in frequencies you can hear. Boy, he was on target, all pun intended. But anyhow, I somehow, in his busy calendar, I convinced Brandon to join me on the podcast. Uh, I think all of you will get to learn his story a little bit, why Silencer Central is the leader in making it easier, busting some of the myths around suppressors, and he's a huge voice for shooting, for hunting, for conservation. He is generous beyond generous to our causes, and I know they're never going to say that, and they don't do it for the marketing splash. That's why they just do it. They don't make a big deal out of it, but they are doing tons of work to support the conservation groups. And I just, he and I, whenever we're together, it seems like we're at shows or we're at events, and you don't get to spend as much time visiting as you'd like. And so, in preparation of this and then recording this podcast, I think that people get a feel for Brandon and the culture that he has built around a very successful business, Silencer Central. And I'm going to hit the button here, and when I do that, Brandon's going to be on the other end from his headquarters out there in South Dakota. And I appreciate y'all being here to listen to what I think is going to be a really interesting conversation. As I went walking, I saw a sign there, and on the sign it said no trespassing, but on the other side it said nothing. Well, that side was made for you and me. As I was walking, let a ribbon on highway, I saw a Brandon Maddox, how are you today?
Most excellent. Appreciate you guys allowing us this opportunity.
Oh, Brandon, thank you. You're the busiest guy I'm trying to think of anyone I know who's any busier than you.
I don't know about that.
Your central headquarters in South Dakota this morning. You were being. Is there ever a time you're not an ambassador for South Dakota for the shooting and hunting industry, or is that just like your other job?
Well, I feel like I try. It took a while. It took a while to get people to listen, but now I feel like people are listening now, which was part of the challenge, which is good.
Uh, well, people may not understand. I don't know if I've ever told the story, but you and I met 4 years ago, I think, just after the whole COVID thing and some of the events started happening again. And you walked up to me and you said, what is it about you hunters that you guys have this resistance to hunting with suppressors? And my friends at Nosler were talking to me at the same time. One of my friends who shoots a lot of matches, he's talking to me. I'm like, I don't have a good answer to that. And here we are, 4 years later, with me now having 3 full seasons of hunting with a suppressed rifle. So I'm pointing a lot of that back to you.
No, I appreciate that. I don't know if I deserve all the credit, but no, I mean, that's really my job starting in 2005 was to convince people A, they were legal, and B, you can hunt with them. So I'm glad I'm
Yeah.
finally breaking through a little bit. I mean, we're convinced that once you try it, you'll definitely never go back. So you usually end up
Oh,
getting more. So
yeah, people now think I'm a walking billboard for hunting with a suppressed rifle, and I am because I have a left ear that's borderline non-functioning.
oh
If,
wow.
if we're driving down the road and I'm sitting in the passenger seat, I may as well just have full earplugs in because people are talking in my left ear, and I get tired of saying, "What? What was that?"
Right.
Uh, so I'm here for all the people younger than me who will be smarter than me, who will, and if you're right-handed, your left ear will work, and if you're left-handed, your right ear will still work. But hey, it's great to have you here and getting to know you. Last year in Missoula, you and I got to spend some time at the RMEF event because you guys are involved in all the conservation groups, all the hunting groups. Is that
Yeah,
just
we try. I mean, that seems like that's the best way to give back and also get the word out there. So it's been a real win-win.
Yeah, so I appreciate you taking the time. I know when you're at those things, you're really busy,
Oh
and
yeah.
you seem to always have some time, and I really appreciate that. But
Yes, sir.
let's get to the story of how someone who didn't you go to school to be a pharmacist? Wasn't that?
Yes, yes. I keep my pharmacy license up.
Do
Yes.
you?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Because it's kind of when people ask me, Randy, how did a CPA become somebody involved in the media space? There's got to be a story here, Brandon, about how a pharmacist becomes the leading voice for, well, leading company for suppressors and shooting. And I mean, you're involved in so many things. NSSF, I see you all these places.
yeah,
How did this happen?
yeah. No, that's a good. Yeah, that's a good question. So, the honest truth is, my father's a pharmacist, and
Oh,
when I went off to college, I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where your son graduated from.
uh-huh.
And I did undergrad there. And I was thinking, okay, I could do a 4 year degree, and I wasn't really sure what I would major in. Or for 5 years, I could be a pharmacist. Back then it was a 5 year program. You get a BS in pharmacy. So, yeah, I went to pharmacy school like my dad did. Um, and then I sometimes kid that it helped me meet my wife because my wife is also a pharmacist. And that's how I got to South Dakota because my wife is from South Dakota. So we actually
Okay.
met at a pharmacy convention, and they said you don't want to meet her. She's from South Dakota, and I didn't know what that meant. It means you move here, which has been great. But so how did I get started? So I would say that when I first moved to South Dakota, I realized very quickly that my in-laws were very much into firearms, as most of the state of South Dakota was.
Yeah,
Yeah, I grew up around firearms, but mostly in the southeast. So I didn't really know what they hunted out here, other than pheasants was the obvious. But
right.
so I went to my in laws and asked them, and they said, well, most people varmint hunt. So I went and bought a 223 and started shooting prairie dogs.
Yeah.
And I'm super competitive. I don't like not winning, and the prairie dogs were winning. I mean, every time I shot, they went down in the hole and hid. And I kept telling myself I drove 4.5 hours to shoot a lot of these things, not to watch them go down in the
Uh,
hole. Um, so one day I was at a gun show with my father-in-law. And we saw a silencer, and I think it was more of a tactical setup. It was more of a, just to kind of get some attention to come into the booth. But it made me start thinking, wow, if I could put a suppressor on my, at that time I'd upgraded to a 22-250 just to cut through the wind a
yeah.
little better. And I ended up buying a silencer at the local gun store, and it was just an absolute game changer on prairie dogs. I mean, I always tell people I actually ran out of ammunition. I mean, no one who goes to shoot prairie dogs wants to run out of ammunition. So I
Right.
have a whole truck full of it and actually ran out of ammunition. So that's how I know it was super good, because the prairie dogs didn't run. It's interesting because they hear it. It's not silent, but they just couldn't tell
Right.
where it came from. So they would kind
Yeah.
of just look around and go, "Wow, I wonder what happened to my buddy. He was standing here a minute ago." you
Yeah.
know. Um, but the honest truth is, I could tell very quickly that the local gun store was not really set up to do transfers for suppressors,
Hmm.
and it just it it became a frustration for me. Honestly, it wasn't me looking at a business opportunity. It was more me looking at, man, I mean, I felt like they made me feel an inch tall when I went in there and started asking questions about suppressors, and
Yeah.
I could tell that honestly that they didn't really know much either. But once I got my second one there, I told my wife that there's no way I'm going to get a third suppressor there. My father-in-law, luckily enough, had a pharmacy. He's a pharmacist too. So is my mother-in-law, believe it or not. But anyway, they have a pharmacy in South Dakota, and he had a federal farms license there. So
Okay.
I thought, man, if I could just get my own federal farms license and sell suppressors, then life will be easy. I won't have to go deal with a local gun dealer. So
Yeah.
I ended up getting my own federal farms license, getting the SOT to sell silencers, started buying ones that worked out really well. And then my wife kind of leaned on me because it's pretty expensive to have that license. You're paying a
Right.
thousand bucks every July 1st. So she's like, you started your career out of pharmacy school. You did pharmaceutical sales. Don't you think you could sell a few of those? Was kind of the intuition I got for,
Yeah.
we're paying $1,000 a year, so you got toys to play with. Why don't you go sell a few? So yeah, I just started working gun shows, and it really felt like my niche. I mean, I had sold pharmaceuticals for 4 or 5 years before I moved up in the pharmaceutical industry, and um, it's interesting. I was telling my dad that you give a person a pill that could save their life, and they will complain to you nonstop about the price, even if it's a $5 copay.
Yeah.
But if you tell someone a silencer for a firearm and it's something they want, they will find the way to get the money. It's just amazing to me. I mean, you're selling medication that can save their life. They complain about the price. You sell them something that's a toy they want. They will find the money to get it no matter what it takes. I mean, some of these Hutterite colonies would go out and trap more furs and sell them, and they're not even supposed to have firearms or
Yeah.
silencers, and at their colonies, but they would come buy them in droves just because they wanted one. So I loved selling something that somebody wanted. And the reality is, I found out at my first gun show that no one knew anything about silencers. I mean, they were
Right.
illegal at that time in Iowa. So I started in 2005. So I've been doing it 20 years. But when I first started, they were not legal at a state level in Iowa or Minnesota, which border us. So a lot of the
Right.
gun shows, you would meet people from there. But I always say, gosh, if you walk into a room and you're at a gun show, I knew more than 100% of people in the room. And it didn't mean I knew a whole lot. It just meant I knew more than anyone else. So I was like, this is perfect. I love this. And no, it just sort of took off from there. I started working gun shows, farm shows, sportsman shows. I used to say anywhere there's a man with a wallet, preferably by himself, not with his wife. Wives don't have a tendency to agree with large purchases. So uh, sometimes the sportsman shows, they'd come back the next day and get it. But no, it was so, and going back to the pharmacy, because I think that people sometimes do think it's weird. But I would say that, you know, I find that like sometimes men aren't as good with paperwork. You probably hear that too from your
Oh,
accounting
oh,
background.
my wife tells me that all the time. She's like, "Why do they
Totally.
even give guys instruction manuals and stuff? You guys just disregard all the details."
Totally. So I think people are like sort of surprised that me as a guy would be good at all the paperwork, but I think it was just what I learned in pharmacy school, right patient, right bottle, right medication, right doctor, right, just all the details that it took to get a prescription filled and make sure everything was done properly, that detail buttoned down.
Hmm.
I think sort of helped me with all the paperwork with ATF, because this was years ago before e-forms. And I mean, I would create a folder for each person based on what they bought and put little stickers as to where they signed and what, I had it super buttoned down. People just loved it. I mean, technology obviously has changed things, but I think it's also helped build good rapport with the ATF, because when
Yeah.
you talk to them about, compliance issues, we're, with Silence Essentials licensed in 42 states. So I've got to follow state law and federal law. And they like the idea that pharmacy is the same way. You got to follow the state law of the state you're in, and then you also got to follow, the federal law. So I think it's been good, and I do keep my license up. I mean, I'm still licensed in North Carolina, where I went to school, and Florida, my first job out of school, and then here in South Dakota. I let my North Carolina lapse, and then I started feeling guilty. I thought my professors would probably be upset, so I went back and just did the hours, the continuation hours, and paid the the
Yeah.
yearly fee. But no, it is definitely a different background. I did get advice to take it off my business card. I've left it in my email, but people are like, some people feel like it's a distraction. They're like,
Uh-huh.
we don't want people to take away from the success you've had as a business. Hundreds of employees, and Inc. 5000 winning for growth and stuff like that from being the pharmacist. But I still like the pharmacist. Just
Yeah.
it's fun.
Yeah.
It's good. I mean, the problem is, I would say the good thing is my wife, being a pharmacist, she was valedictorian of her class. So she knows every medication and she knows everything about them. So it's great when someone asks me a question because they know I'm a pharmacist. I'm like, we're going to have to phone a friend. We're going to call my
Yeah.
wife right now.
Oh, that reminds me of, me being a CPA for 35 years. I go and do seminars on elk hunting and people want tax advice.
I can see
A-
that. Yeah, I can see
And
that.
you probably laughed when we first swapped business cards. My business card now says Randy Newberg, comma, Hunter.
Oh,
And
good.
and
Smart.
that came from one of my clients. She stopped by my office and it was September, October, and she needed to get a hold of me. And she took my business card and she crossed off CPA and wrote Hunter in there and left
Inter-
it on my desk.
Interesting.
And
No,
I'm
that's
like,
cool.
Linda, that I'm going to change my business card to that because that's what I've aspired to be all my life as a hunter, not necessarily a CPA. So,
Oh, that's good. That's
yeah,
good.
my
No,
my
that's perfect.
my business card says Randy Newberg Hunter. Heck with the CPA part of it
Yeah,
anymore.
I
My
like that.
my my wife's looking for a better accountant if anyone knows one. So, but you have I think in your humbleness you won't admit this, but I will. You've kind of led this, if you want to call it a revolution. I don't know. You have made it so much easier for people like me to end up with a solution that they've wanted for a long time, but just the headaches and complications of getting a suppressor, finding someone who actually, you referred to the old gun shop that you went to, and you felt like after a half hour you knew more about the process than they did.
Yeah.
It has never, well, until recently, it had been this idea that you got to give blood and register your first and second born in order to even start the process
Right.
to get a suppressor. And I think that discouraged a lot of people. And then you made reference to the idea that in some states they still are illegal, but it's an expanding portfolio of states where it's become legal. And most states it's legal to hunt with one. uh, you kind of have been that person that I don't know if you'd call busted the myths, broke down the barriers, but you guys have made it a whole lot easier based on what it used to be.
Yeah, and I would say the one thing that really helped me is, I still work these gun shows, and I think that's helpful, because if you sell someone a suppressor and you hear about something in the process that didn't go well, then you want to fix that. So, when you got 20 years worth of feedback at these shows, I mean, obviously, when we scaled our business, now we can do 1,000 e-forms an hour. So
Wow.
when I think about where I started, where everything was handwritten, I mean, we've learned a lot of stuff over the years about the pain points. And then, I would say I've taken a different approach with the ATF. I'm like, hey, I'm going to put a suit on and I'm going to treat you a professional just like I am. How do I do what you want, but also do what my customers want, and then create a win-win? And
Yeah.
oddly enough, I don't think they'd ever had anyone do that. And they were willing to sit down and kind of come up with some things that were, win-win using digital. And, it just, it just seemed like it continued to evolve. Every time I hit sort of a, sort of a roadblock, I would say, "Hey, how do we fix this? Do I need
Yeah.
to get more legislatively involved? Do I need to sit down with ATF?" And yeah, we just had some good wins over the years. And, I still think there was nobody at the table in 1934 when silencers got put on the NFA list. I
Yeah.
think if someone had been at the table and said, hey, these don't need to be so highly regulated, it would have never have been. But, my understanding is they were going to put handguns in that spot and they switched it out with silencers at the last minute. So it was right
Oh,
after prohibition and everybody was kind of fed up with the government, stopping you from doing everything fun. So,
really? That's where it came from, huh?
yeah,
And so the terminology suppressor, silencer, it seems like silencer came from that old legislation. Isn't
yeah,
that kind of
yeah.
where it was originally called a silencer, and over time people use it as suppressor, silencer, kind of synonymous?
Yeah, no, good question. So I always say the guy that invented it, he got the first patent and he called it a silencer. And then
Okay,
the ATF, the legal definition is a silencer. And I do find the first time a customer is looking when they get on Google, they search silencer. But I do find they call it a suppressor after they shoot it because they realize it's not silent. So
right.
I always say if we're looking for repeat business, let's advertise suppressors. If we're looking for new customers, we say silencers. And that's just kind of it's just kind of the way it's worked over the years.
Huh. Well, there's always been, I call it institutional inertia.
Yeah,
That it's difficult. There's only military, law enforcement, and that's the term I use for why there was such slow adoption in the hunting space. And now it's like, why, why did somebody not wake us up sooner?
right.
But it's very popular now, and I hope it continues to remain
No,
popular.
yeah, I agree. I mean, I always say that if you talk to someone that's hunted suppressed, they'll tell you they'll never hunt again, without shooting suppressed. So there's very
Yeah.
few things I can think of in life where, I've never really hopped in a Ford and said I'm only going to ever drive a Ford again. Or I mean, it's just rare to have a situation where you say I'll never shoot without a suppressor moving forward when I hunt, and that's almost like sells itself.
Yeah. Well, I people ask me, how can you do this? We did a video about me on an Alaska black bear hunt. The first animal I shot with a suppressed rifle was with my 308, and all of a sudden all these comments came up about, well, hunting with a suppressor, that's not legal,
Right?
why would you do that? It's going to impair the accuracy of your rifle.
Yeah,
I couldn't believe all the, I call them myths that
yeah,
came up. And I felt like I was instantly on the defensive with a bunch of other hunters. I'm like, wait a second, guys, I'm here to tell you why I am never hunting unsuppressed again. When I go to Canada, obviously you can't, because you can't bring a suppressor across. But
right.
uh, I was surprised how many people said, well, that's going to impair your accuracy. You aren't going to be able to keep it clean in the snow, or it's going to get full of dirt and grime. And can't. And one more thing, I got to maintain. It'll break.
Yeah,
Like, where did all this come from? And I think a lot of times when we have unfamiliarity, it's easy for us to maybe, I don't know if cling to, but to believe some of the myths,
right.
if you want to call it that. Because how many states is hunting suppressed legal in these days?
Good question. So obviously, silencers are legal in 42 states, and you can hunt in 41 of them. So the only state is Connecticut. And I sometimes make the joke that why would you want to hunt in Connecticut anyway? No one's ever argued with me. So
Nothing against our friends in Connecticut,
yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah, that is interesting that they allow suppressors, but they don't allow hunting with them.
yeah. It's the
Uh,
only
I,
state.
I get some people, back to your point of, when you're shooting prairie dogs, it's not completely silent, which is
No.
again why I call it a suppressor. Uh, the last time we were in Alaska, both of us had suppressors, and we thought we are going to do a quote unquote twofer on these two really big bears that were kind of posturing to each other out on this big tide flat. And Jace, my camera guy, he gets first shot. He's got a suppressed, what did he have? I think he had a 6.5 PRC. So I got a suppressed 308, and the idea is we'll find out if these are completely silent or not.
Yeah.
Well, Jay shoots and drops that bear, but the other bear is like I'm out of here. If these were completely silent, that other bear would have stood around like, well, I wonder what happened to old Pete over there. You have a heart attack or what?
Yeah.
Uh, no, he headed for the timber. So it kind of, for me, I tell people if you've ever shot one, you would realize they're not completely silent. It's not
Right.
like Hollywood has kind of made it like this. No,
Yeah.
they make it sound like that's all the noise it makes. Well, there's the bullet traveling, there's the impact, there are noises out there,
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I think the comments from people who say, well, that's really not fair. They've never shot one.
True.
So they probably don't understand that it's not like they say on TV or in
Right.
Hollywood that is completely silent. It suppresses things.
Totally.
Uh, it has done nothing but maybe improved my accuracy.
Good.
The idea that it impairs your accuracy, uh, it just so much more comfortable to shoot, both in
Yep.
terms of recoil, in terms of the noise, but also if you do need a follow-up shot, you don't get the muzzle lift that you would get unsuppressed.
Right.
Hopefully, you don't need a follow-up shot, but my groups are it goes back to what I always say. I'm the weak link, right?
Yeah.
And the groups that I shoot out of my suppressed rifles are only as good as my talent level,
Yes.
and they could be better if my talent was better.
Yeah, I mean, anytime we do test, it seems like it tightens your bullet groups. Just having that extra weight on the end of the barrel just helps stabilize it. And you're right. One myth too is people feel like it slows it down. It actually speeds it up. You know, if you
Yeah,
put a chronograph, it's 10 or
I,
15 feet per second, usually more.
yeah, and I have noticed that because I chrono all of my loads. I get dials from Leupold. I get the CDS system, custom dial system, and I want to know what my muzzle velocities are. So I'm paying close attention to that. And I have some older dials back from when these rifles didn't have suppressors on them, and I have new
Oh,
dials that for when I do shoot suppressed, which is anytime other than Canada.
yeah,
And it did bump up the velocities a little bit. And I was
yeah,
thinking, is this because the Nosler loaded them a little hotter or whatever? So I
yeah,
called Mike over at Nosler. I'm like, why would I get higher velocities? He's like, hey, you big dummy. It's because you're adding a little more, in effect, you're adding a
yeah,
little more barrel length. And so
yep,
the pressures get to be pushed straight out the barrel for a little longer than without a suppressed situation. So yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that,
yeah. No, totally. I agree.
and so it's for me it has been an awakening, and I know people get tired of me out at the range or out in the field saying, you ought to think about a suppressor, and I I'm in the process of getting a new nozzler suppressor, and you guys have helped me, and so I
Good.
thought, all right, I want to walk through and see how this is going to work. So I I built a portal account with you guys,
Perfect.
uploaded my ID,
Yep.
and you guys were going to mail me a home fingerprint kit.
Yep.
And I said, well, you guys are at this trade show I'm at. Can I just go to the booth? And they're like, oh, yeah, go to the booth. They'll fingerprint you in a heartbeat.
Yeah, totally.
So I went to the booth. I told them what my portal account was. They pulled that up. They fingerprinted me in about 2 minutes, maybe.
Oh yeah.
And now I'm just waiting for Nosler to fulfill the inventory for you guys so it can land on my doorstep.
There we go. Hey, perfect. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a good partnership with Nosler. They've been great to work with. We met with their
Yeah.
leadership there at Shot Show, and yeah, we're helping
Yeah.
them push a lot of silencers through our, shipping it directly to your front door.
Yeah. And now one of our guys, he loves this 300 Win Mag. He has Marcus, but it's not threaded. It's
Oh,
an
we could do that.
older rifle. Yeah. So he comes to me. He's like, "Hey, did you know that Silencer Central will thread a barrel for a suppressor?" I'm like, "What?" Like, yeah. So it's sitting out here in a vise, and he's about ready to take the barrel off in action
Oh,
and
perfect.
ship
Yeah,
it
he
to
can
you
send us.
guys.
Yeah, you can send the whole thing too, whatever's easier for him. We got a gunsmith that takes them apart, and then a machinist that threads them.
No way. Oh, so he could just send the whole
Yeah.
rifle?
Oh, heck yeah, yeah, for sure, yeah.
Oh, we thought we had to disassemble it
No,
to ship it
no,
to you.
they just take the scope off because we'd want to beat it up in the mail. But yeah, yeah, any accessories you can take off, yeah, just ship it to us. We'll take it apart. Yeah, we got that. That's the hard part. I mean, our gunsmith will spend 45 minutes on average taking one apart, and our machinist it takes him about 3 minutes to thread one. We have a CNC lathe that's computerized. They can really fly through those.
Huh. And then it'll just come back with
Yeah,
threads and he'll be able to put his suppressor on there and
yes, sir. We'll put a
off
thread
and running.
protector on there to protect the threads, and yeah, I mean, we call it our 360 program, where we'll ship you an empty case. You just put it in there. It's actually a gun case. It
Yeah,
ships to us. We thread it, and then you get to keep the case. We send it back.
really? Because he
Yeah,
was okay. Well, I'm gonna
yeah,
tell him that before he takes us apart
yeah.
over
No,
here.
totally, totally. Yeah, we try to make it easy. Years ago I started that working the shows because I'd say, hey, if you bring your rifle to the show, I'll ship it back to you free. So
Uh-huh.
I can remember a lot of shows I worked up in Minot, North Dakota. If I hadn't had all that weight in the back of the truck, I don't know if I would have made it home. The roads were so slick with snow and ice. Man, I'm glad we got a couple hundred rifles back there in the trailer and in the truck bed to keep us from sliding all over the highway.
If anyone has been to Minot, which I have been there many times, I had a family member who lived in Bottineau, which
Oh
is
yeah,
even more remote than Minot.
yeah.
They would understand what you're talking about crappy roads.
Oh boy, yeah, it's rough. I mean, yeah, and of course, Minot was close enough to those oil fields. When those oil fields were booming, there was a lot of guys up there who didn't have anywhere to spend their money. So we love to see them coming to the gun show.
Well, that was a business opportunity you probably didn't even know.
No,
Uh,
it worked out well.
yeah, one of the things that uh, has been, I don't know if this falls under the category of institutional inertia, but my dad was old school, right? I remember anything other than a 4-power scope on his 30-30 Marlin. He had a 336 Marlin carbine lever action. Anything that was outside of that boundary was, well, why do you need that? I would never use that. Well, when my dad passed away, he still was holding on to the remnants of that 336 in a 30-30. I think there's a little bit of the, that's not how my dad did it, or that's not how my Uncle Joe did it, or how Grandpa did it. And so I, I think some of these things, hunting being a legacy, institutional sort of, handed down information, sometimes those habits get handed down, whether they're good habits or bad habits, they still get handed down.
Yep.
And we end up having to struggle a little bit to steer away from those. If my dad looked at my setup right now, if he was alive and he saw me with, a 3 to 18 Leupold with a Howa superlight bolt action rifle shooting a 7mm 08 for deer, he'd disown me. He's like, and what's it? And he'd say, "What's that thing you got out on the end of it there?" Dad, that's a suppressor. He'd be like, "Son, I raised you better than that." Uh, but
That's
these are tools that are available to us today to make us more effective when we're out there in the field.
right.
And it,
Absolutely.
and to me, as much as I still have an old Marlin 336 in a 30-30, a lever action, I have my grandpa's old 30 Remington, a model 14 Remington slide action. I'm not going out there hunting with those today
Yeah.
because I have all this other stuff available to me that's going to make me more effective. The likelihood of me being able to make a great shot and make sure that that deer or that elk or whatever it is only needs one shot.
Yep.
I'm going to embrace these tools.
Yeah.
And I get
Absolutely.
the old school stuff. When it comes to other things, I'm a little bit of old school. My crew, they're all under 35. They're like, "Man, you're old school. You're like a curmudgeon." I'm like, "Well," so I hope that people realize that these are tools that make us better out in the field.
Absolutely.
And and that's what I want. I want everyone to have the safest, most, I guess, successful outcome when they pull that trigger. And
Yeah.
they're using the tools that are going to help them do that.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
regardless of what my dad might have said. uh, you guys must get all kinds of, I guess, if we want to continue on the idea of myths or why people might be resistant to hunting with a suppressor. I can't imagine some of the stories you guys get.
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to think of, at first when I first started this, everyone thought they were illegal. You couldn't own them, and then everyone thought you
Yeah.
couldn't hunt with them.
Yep.
Um, I think we talked earlier. People feel like it's going to slow their bullet down. I just remind them that the hole through the middle is bigger than the bullet, so nothing's touching. So it's not
Yeah.
gonna, it's not gonna slow it down. Um, one I would used to hear was, well, the ATF can come search my house. I'm not
Oh,
ever getting one
really?
of those. Oh yeah, ATF can come into my house whenever they want, middle of the
Oh,
night if they want. I'll never own one of those things, and that's always hard when
huh.
there's a big group of guys standing around and some guys making some big bold statement. You always say that you can't really lose your right of search and seizure unless you're involved in some kind of criminal activity. So I try to
Yeah.
connect the dots for them. I
Yeah.
think people are afraid they're going to be on a list or something because they're
Huh.
getting a silencer. I'm like, if you pay taxes, they know who you are. You're already on a list.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know.
Yeah. As a CPA, I'm like, you have no idea how many lists you are already on.
Hmm.
And so that's an interesting one. And since I have my own FFL, I'm kind of at the mercy of ATF wants to show up and do a
Yep.
surprise inspection of my records. I I can either agree to that or I can lose my FFL.
You're
That's kind of
true.
what you say. I'm going to
Yeah.
keep this logbook. I'm going to keep a good inventory, and I'm going to follow all your rules. So I've kind of already raised my hand on that one. I know some people haven't, but they don't have an FFL. But that's interesting that people think that is a
Yeah.
license for someone to show up at your door and search your house or something.
Yeah.
I
I've
would
never
have,
understood that one.
huh?
I don't know where they got that from. I'm trying to think if there's any others that are I think people don't realize the whole multi-caliber thing. I think people
Yeah,
think they have to get one per gun per caliber. I think
that's
that's
true.
probably an apprehension in some people's mind. I mean, most of us look at our gun case or our safe and we're like, wow, I'm afraid I don't want to get into silencers because then I'm going to have to get one for every one of those. Whereas in
Right.
most cases, you can get a multi-caliber suppressor and use it on 30 cal and less, even
Right.
223s, and
Yeah.
so I think there's a misconceptions in some ways there too.
Yeah, I have the Nosler ALTI 30, which the 30 stands for 30 caliber. But I use it on my 7mm 08, which gets you
Yep.
down to the 284. I use it on a 270. I use it on a 6.5. I use it on a 6, which gets you all the way down to 2.43.
Yeah.
So all out of one suppressor.
Yeah.
And I've not noticed any difference of, oh, it's tighter groups with my 30 or my 308 than it is with my 7mm 08.
Right.
Pretty much identical. I'd forgot about that. Because I had that same
Yeah.
I thought the same thing. Well, I'm gonna have to buy about 20 of these, and
Yeah.
this is a lot of paperwork and a lot of
Yeah.
money. But yeah, now it's just universal. I take it with me wherever I go. Uh, Make sure I have my paperwork in order, and you know, screw it off and on, and
Yeah.
it's pretty quick
No, that's
and
good.
ready to
I used
go.
to hear too that you can't cross, state lines without getting ATS permission, and that is the case for like machine guns and short barrel rifles,
Okay.
which sometimes people think the same with silencers, but that's not the case. The form that you can fill out when you're crossing state lines with like short barrel rifle, destructive device, or
Yeah.
machine gun, it says on there that you can put silencers on there, but it's not required. So I think some
Yeah.
people get mixed up there. Sort of a myth. They think
Yeah.
that. I think some people think the tax stamp maybe is annually in their mind. That $200 you have to pay to.
Oh,
Yeah, I always tell people it's a one time. It's kind of like
right.
if you bought a car and the local courthouse wants their piece of the tax for transferring it. Very analogous to that.
Yeah.
Um, so there is a lot of like sort of misconceptions. I still say that's one of the big reasons why people don't buy them is there's so many
Mhm.
misconceptions that they don't understand the process enough, so they're almost scared to kind of get into it. I mean, analogy I used to use internally is that I'm not the guy that's going to pick up the Rubik's cube because there's zero chance I'm going to solve it. So I would see people walk by the booth and they wouldn't really say a word, and you just assume they're not interested. But once you get a little bit more involved and engage people and bring them to your booth and start talking to them, they're interested in silencers. They were just worried about all the hassles and paperwork and all the stuff that it took them to have to get through. But once you sort of break it down and they have a better understanding of it, they're like, okay, that was as bad as I thought. How do I get started? So
Yeah.
it's just interesting how sometimes as humans we see something, we think it's going to be too big of a hassle, it's not worth it, we don't even really engage.
Yep. No, that's for, I would say I fell into that category a little bit. Also, there were a whole pile of these myths that were stacked up over by me that I was listening to instead of thinking about, okay, what is this process and why am I not going and finding out for myself
Right.
how this really works versus just listening to the supposed people in the know. Another one I get is people say, well, you can't fly with it. Well, if you can't fly with it, no one told me that because I've been flying all over the place. I just check it
Yeah.
with my firearm, same as I do,
Yep.
my rifle,
100%. Yeah.
and
Yep.
I've never had TSA or an airline say anything about it.
No,
So,
no, yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's I've never had any problems either. You're right. I just put it in my regular gun case, or if I'm traveling without a firearm, just the silencer itself, I'll put
mhm,
it like in a pistol case and lock it, treat it just like a regular firearm, and declare it when I check it in.
okay,
And I've been known, if I go to Africa, throw it in my bags, my regular like clothes and stuff, if it's just a silencer in a locked box, but then still declare it as a firearm, and it just goes all the way through there. So
yeah,
yeah, it's
huh?
no, that's a good one.
It,
People feel like they can't travel with them, but yeah, it's treated just like a regular firearm.
yeah, it's just so interesting when I think about in Europe, you're looked at side eye if you don't have a suppressed rifle. And we always think of Europe as being so regulatory, so restricted when it comes to firearms.
Totally.
When it comes to some of these accessories, they're out in front of us.
Oh yeah, totally,
And
100%.
uh,
Yeah,
I
same
just
way.
find that interesting.
Yeah, same way in Africa, right? You can't even in most countries in Africa, you can't even own more than one caliber. At least I know in South Africa, you can only own one rifle per caliber. So if you have one 223, you got to get rid of it if you want a different 223.
Wow.
And there you can just go in and buy. They are serialized, and they can get them at the gun store. But yeah, there's just go in and buy it and leave with
Yeah. Huh.
it.
Well, I see you out. I see a lot of pictures of you out hunting, doing that fun stuff. So you must get chances to not be in front of cameras, microphones, or at trade shows once in a while.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, in January I went to my annual wolf hunt. I went with my buddy who's from Minot.
Uh-huh.
He's an oncologist up there. So every year we go wolf hunting. So it's always a reminder what it is to shoot without a suppressor and the
Yeah.
hassles of having to carry, earmuffs and earplugs. And it seems like I'm always losing them and I have a million excuses, but I'm like, this is a
Yeah.
good thing I sell silencers for a living because I'm not good at keeping up with hearing protection.
So you do that up in Canada?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I had last year I went to the Northwest Territories and hunted. And the year before I was in the Yukon, and both
Oh,
times I had to hunt unsuppressed.
I know. It's
And
tough.
it was really
It is tough.
it's different all of a sudden. Even when
I agree.
I'm preparing for that hunt, I'm out at the range and resetting everything to make sure, all right, no longer suppressed. What's my velocities have changed a little bit. Maybe my point of impact is slightly different. Uh yeah, it takes some getting used to now.
No, yeah, I totally agree. It's funny is you were talking about Leopold earlier. I was telling Skip at Leopold that I wasn't thinking about recoil because I'm always using a suppressor. And the first wolf I shot last year, so much recoil, it actually scoped me. I mean, I was
No.
bleeding. I was like, oh man, I, I was embarrassed. I mean, the guide comes to pick me up, and I got two dead wolves there, and he's like, "Where's all the blood?" I said, "Unfortunately, it's mine."
Oh, Skipper won't let you live that one down,
No,
I'm sure.
no, no. Yeah,
Oh,
I felt horrible. I was just used to getting that recoil reduction, and then yeah, to
yeah.
get hammered there.
Well, that's one of the fun parts about people in the industry is how many of people like you and others hunting is part of what got them into where they are and what they
Totally.
still continue to do and carve out time to go do it. And from what I see, that seems to be reflected in your support for the conservation groups.
Yeah,
You guys are huge supporters of the Elk Foundation, which is near and dear to my heart.
yeah,
Um, Giving back, making sure that you know that
yeah.
those
I think
groups have the funding and profile and advocacy to do the things that they can do on behalf of their membership.
yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, yeah, RMEF is that, they were a good one. It was like, I could tell when I first started talking to them, they weren't too sure about the whole silencer thing. So I asked, could I go meet with their board? And I sat down with them, and,
Mhm.
um, it worked out really well. After I got to know them and talk to them, we sort of create a partnership where we give, suppressors to their local chapters, and whatever, the silencer auctioned off for, we give them 100% of that. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
it's been a good relationship.
no, that's amazing how generous you guys are in that. One of the other myths that I overlooked because now I take it for granted. Like my son just got a suppressor, and he said, "You aren't gonna believe this. It only took a week." I'm like,
Yeah.
"What?"
Yeah.
Back when I did it just 3 or 4 years ago, it took 4 or 5 months.
Yeah.
And people
Yeah.
thought I had the inside track because it only took 4 or 5 months. They're like, "How'd you get it back that soon?"
Yeah.
So
No,
what's the turnaround times you guys are able to do now?
yeah, good question. So, you know, we see about 4 days on an individual and 8 days on a trust. So it's quick.
Whoa, that
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's a bell-shaped curve. So there's some people that, I always tell people, if you've ever been arrested, or if there's a felon with the same name and same date of birth as you, then it's going to take longer. But
yeah,
80% of them, and that's stats from the ATF, 80% of them get approved pretty much instantly.
wow.
Um, the good thing about Silencer Central is we use the same trust in every state, so it's kind of a standard. So the ATF's reviewed it enough that
Mhm.
ours seem to go through almost as quick as an individual, which is good. It's good that they aren't having to spend the time to review the trust since it's the same for each customer.
Yeah, so some people may wonder, what is he talking about, a trust?
Yeah.
You can establish a trust, and as a CPA, my specialty was trust and estate planning. So
Oh,
for
cool.
me, I speak trust language, like talking about what's for dinner that night. But a lot of people don't come from the background I do. So when you talk about a trust, they're like, "What are you talking about?
Yeah.
A trust? That's complicated. That's a problem. That's going to get me out in the weeds." I mean, you guys do oodles of them, right? And
Oh,
there's
yeah. Totally.
benefits of holding it in a trust rather than as an individual.
Yes, totally. So, the history on that is that when I first started selling silencers, everyone got them as an individual because back then you had to go see your local sheriff and they had to basically sign that you weren't a felon. That was kind of pre 2017. Um, but then some states sheriffs said they weren't going to sign for people to get a suppressor because they didn't want the liability or whatever they were, the
Hmm.
administrative hassle. So pre-Obama, they considered a trust to be an entity, and there was no background check on an entity. So they went through pretty quick. You just had to get a background check when you went to go pick it up. But um, so the benefit of the trust, like you said, is a silencer would essentially transfer from us, the dealer, into the trust, and the trust will own it. And then the person that we sell it to is in charge of the trust. And really, with a stroke of a pen, after it's approved, they can add anyone they want to the trust, and that person can use the silencer when they're not there. So I've got a daughter who's 19. So that's another interesting fact. You have to be 21 for a dealer to transfer a suppressor or silencer to you. But if you add someone to a trust, they only have to be 18 because it's sort of like a handgun. You can legally own or possess a handgun or a silencer in the states where they're legal at 18, but the dealer can only transfer it if you're 21. So
Yeah.
you can add someone to your trust and then they can use the suppressor when you're not there, which is a nice benefit. And also, you can establish who gets the suppressor when you pass away, which again is a nice benefit because it's a fair amount of paperwork. Um, but yeah, Silencer Central gives a free trust to every customer, and we always have. It's just sort of a
Yeah.
benefit, just to we help you maintain it too. If you want to add people, remove people, some guys will call and say, "Hey, I'm divorced. How do we get her off?" Or some people say, "We got a new wife. How do we get her on?" Or, I got
Yeah.
another sister, brother, friend I want to put on there. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's nice benefits.
Yeah, that's one of the things people don't realize, even in the tax world, is that trusts uh, have no end date unless you identify an end date. So they're
Yeah.
kind of a perpetual entity.
Yes.
So there's some things you can do with trust that at age 60, I'm like, I just turned 60. What am I going to do with this thing if something happens to me?
Yeah.
So, I've asked your people about the whole trust idea. They're like, well, why didn't you do a trust to start with? I said, well, 3 years ago, everyone told me that if I did it as a trust, it was going to take 4 years. And and so, again, another one of those myths.
Yeah.
So now you're saying 8-day turnaround on your trusts.
Yeah. And we can help you if you want to transfer those that you have as an individual into your trust too. So,
Okay. I might
yeah.
be calling your people saying, hey,
Yeah.
fellers,
Yep.
uh, I bought into the myth here 3 or 4 years ago, and now I'm having some regrets. But no, I think it's, for me anyhow, interesting to observe some. In hunting we have, I don't know if you'd call them revolutionary things or if you'd call them just disrupting events. The adoption of people in the hunting space now starting to find comfort and normalcy hunting with suppressors is one of those disruptive events that I think
Yeah.
we're never going back to
Right.
how it was. Or I hope we don't, because unless you're in the audiologist hearing aid world, you're the only one who is hoping that we go back to how it used to be.
Yeah, no, true. That's yeah. And my brother, he's an ENT, and he always says they don't even fool with selling those anymore now. They're just sitting at Costco because they're so much cheaper there.
Uh, well, this is kind of a funny story. There's an audiologist in Bozeman who is a serious hunter. And my wife started complaining about my hearing. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go see him.
Yeah.
And so I did. And instantly he says, you must shoot a lot and you're right-handed. I'm like, how do you know? And he pulls up this chart and he says, you see that big bottomed out blank spot there? That is absolutely indicative of everybody who's a shooter.
Oh
They
wow, interesting.
they lose these high frequency bands that you just can't hear. And he says, your wife ever say that you don't hear or that you're not listening or you're distracted? I'm like, every day. And so he's a guy I did some CPA work for, and so he's like, "Well, have Kim come in, and we'll go over your results." It was the best thing that he ever did for me.
Oh,
Uh,
good.
he pulls up the chart. And he said, "You see this right here? He can't hear that out of his left ear, and even in his right ear, he's got some impairment there. And this, I don't know if he called it frequency or whatever. He said." Most female voices fall kind of in this band. And so don't talk to them when the TV's on. Don't talk to them when there's road noise or background noise. Don't talk to him from the other room because yeah, it'll fulfill your prophecy that he's not listening. It's just that he's not hearing so he
Interesting.
can't listen. So that was a favor I owed him because after that, now my wife makes sure she's looking at me when she's talking to
Oh
me, that
wow,
there's not a lot of background noise, and we have great discussions now. I've far less of the time do I get told, "Hey, you're not listening to me." But
that's
he
good.
it, the point to me was how quickly he could identify that I came from a family where my dad said, "Oh, you don't wear hearing protection. That's just for those sissies." So until I was 30, I shot a lot of firearms
Oh
with
wow,
zero hearing protection.
right.
And I should almost go get an audiology test again and show that graph he showed me and then just say, this
Interesting.
is, they used to have that thing, this is your brain, this is in your brain, and this is your brain on drugs or something. They'd fry it,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
commercial from 20 years ago. I
yeah.
almost feel like saying, this is your hearing, and have a normal chart, and then have mine that says, this is your hearing.
Yes.
If if you don't take measures, suppressors and other ways to to take care of it while you're shooting, because I never did. My dad just, he thought that was just a waste of time.
Yeah.
And so I'm paying the price for that. I continue to do it as an adult, so that's on me. Uh, but even if you're like me and you have compromised hearing from hunting unsuppressed for or shooting unsuppressed for years, preserve what you have.
Yeah, absolutely.
don't say, oh well, I'm a lost cause. You're not a lost cause until you're done.
Yeah.
And
No. Yeah, good people, yeah, you're right. People say that at shows. They'll walk up and they'll be like, "Well, I've already lost, all my hearing or whatever." And it's like, "Well, save what you got left." I mean,
mhm,
it's worth saving.
absolutely. And that's that's part of my mantra now is, whatever you have left, it's worth saving. And
Totally.
I people see me walking around now. It's fun to read the YouTube comments from the occasional person who still questions my hunting with a suppressed rifle versus just 3 years ago.
Oh
There
yeah.
used to be so many comments even 3 years ago. Now it's rare to get a comment
That's
about it.
good. That's good.
So you guys have been doing great work, Brandon. You're penetrating the hunting market and
We're
converting
trying.
us to
Yeah.
to the, I guess, the way that it should be done, and hopefully to everybody's benefit.
No, we're
That's
trying. Yep.
yeah, you guys have made a huge difference, and I can speak of my own personal experience, and for the audience that tires of me walking around as a billboard for hunting with a suppressed rifle, I apologize, folks, but I don't apologize.
That's perfect.
Yeah, but so you guys are based in Sioux Falls, South Dakota,
Yes, sir. Yep.
and you guys are growing like crazy. You're you're a leader in so many things. I go to the SHOT Show and other places, and I see you guys there. I sit in on a lot of calls or webinars, I guess you'd call it, not calls, with the shooting industry, with some of the legislative folks back in DC. And you guys have really become one of the spokespeople for shooting, the Second Amendment, for hunting. Uh, you like being in that spotlight, or is that
Yeah,
just,
I do. That's the
or,
only way you can make a difference, right? I mean, I feel
yeah,
like when I first started, I mean, I would call the Capitol and Pier in South Dakota, and nobody would even answer. Nobody would respond. But now I've got two lobbyists in DC, and I've got one, group of lobbyists that work for us in South Dakota. And I,
mhm,
I told them in South Dakota, I don't have as many issues at a state level, but anytime there's a firearms related issue, I want them to think silencer central. So at least I have a share of voice at the table, and at least it could be considered.
yeah,
No, I mean, we try. I just feel like that if you don't have a seat at the table, you don't know what's going to happen, and
right,
it just feel like there's always obviously there's a lot of great groups out there that look after certain things, but I feel like just things that we do, from a silencer perspective and hunting, and even our unique business model where we're shipping silencers directly to your front door. I have to be on that pulse like 24/7. I mean, that's the first thing I do in the morning is
yeah,
read, see if there's been any state law changes or proposed changes or how it could impact me. And no, it's good. I mean, I do feel like we're making a difference. And then, like I said, the goal is to be seen as the expert voice. So then people call you and at least they get your opinion. And before they
yeah,
make a decision, at least they have that input.
yeah. Occasionally, I see come across my news feed. I'm like you, Brandon. My coffee in the morning from about 7 to 7:45 is reading all my newsletters, all the things that keep
Yeah.
me up to date on conservation and public land and hunting. And uh, I get some recently from the National Shooting Sports Foundation, and they keep me updated on. There is some federal legislation right now that is floating around Congress that would affect, or I don't know if it'd simplify, complicate. What would it do for the ability to use and hunt and acquire a suppressor?
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple things going out there. I mean, one that's been going on for, I think it first came out in like say 2016 or 17, so it's been quite a few years out there. But one is to try to deregulate suppressors so
Yeah,
they would be treated just like a regular firearm. So of course that would definitely help, sales and availability. And the problem is it's just always difficult to get 60 U.S. senators to agree on anything. That's the hard
yeah,
part. I mean, because people will call us and say you're for it. We're like, yeah, we're for it, but it would be hard to ever get it passed. So mean, it's not like
right.
we don't want to put any effort behind it, but there's probably other things that we could, you know, work with to, make things easier, streamline until you could get to 60 votes. So it is an educational thing. But, you know, I I do think what's good is more and more consumers are actually using suppressors. They're in a better position to educate their elected officials because elected officials, if they don't own a suppressor themselves and haven't, not a big shooter and aren't a part of the industry, which most are not,
Right.
they're going to have very little familiarity with the benefits of suppressors. Only the negatives they see on TV. So
Yeah.
um, I'm sitting on the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation board, so we do a lot of events. It's a bipartisan group, and it's been fun to talk to legislators, even congressmen that are in some of the dark blue states like California, and talk to them about some of the benefits of suppression and hunting, and some of the benefits potentially for their state.
Hmm.
Um, we were working with our lobbyists to come up with a bill, and we brought it before the last Congress, planning on bringing it before this Congress. But basically, it would take that $200 tax stamp and it would put it in Pittman Robertson.
Oh,
So
cool.
basically, you would take the $200, and that's there'll be 1 million silencers sold this year. So if you multiply that by 200, $200 million would be a nice infusion to conservation.
Yeah.
And obviously I hunt, so that I feel like that would benefit the entire industry. But the other benefit I see is that if states started getting that funding that would fund their local state activities, maybe they would be less likely to try to infringe upon that right. I mean,
Hmm.
I think about Washington State, I think about Oregon. They're sort of blue states. Suppressors are legal there, but I could see if they had a chance, they'd probably like to get rid of them.
Yeah.
Just in some of the other things they've done. So if I feel like they would sort of solidify our position if they started getting funding through Pittman Robertson, then maybe they'd be less likely to infringe upon that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
I
and
think
now
there's some opportunities.
with the recent trends, I point this out to a lot of my hunting friends. I say, you understand what percentage of Pittman Robertson revenue is coming from non-hunting shooters, correct? And they're like, no, I thought it all came from hunters. I'm like, no, it used to be 50 years ago.
Yeah,
And that's part of why we've had some reform to what Pittman Robertson money can be used for shooting ranges and other stuff, because a lot of those people, the recreational shooters, are the ones who are funding a huge amount of Pittman Robertson
yep,
funds that come back to state wildlife agencies. And yeah, so if there's more in that pot of money that could come back, and whether it's for recreational shooting, for conservation, for whatever, we all benefit from that. So
totally.
that would be a
Yeah,
great idea. Let me
yeah, it would
know if
be.
I can help with that. I'd
Yeah,
be
it would
happy to.
be the largest infusion because as the number of hunters and shooters has kind of gone down over the years, this definitely would pick up the money back into conservation. So no, my lobbyist came up with the idea. I just explained to him that money right now, the $200 tax stamp just goes to the Treasury, so it's not
Yeah,
really earmarked for anything. And he
yeah,
kind of came up with that, and I'm like, "Wow, that's a great idea. That would make people who are buying a suppressor feel a little bit better about having to pay a tax on it if it was going to something that was their hobby,
right.
passion."
Yeah, for sure. Man, I didn't know that was out there. I'm
Yeah.
gonna be in DC the first week of April,
Oh, there you
uh,
go.
walking around the Capitol on public land issues. Maybe I'll drop
Yeah.
a few. If there's an idea, a bill number, a draft, or something associated with that, I'll
Yeah.
definitely
Okay. Yeah,
do
for
what I
sure.
can
We're
on that
calling it a
one
tax
also.
stamp bill. Yeah. No, that's. I think I'm there the second week in April. So yeah, it's the right time to go this time of year.
Yeah. Well, Brandon, you are. It's always fun to talk with you. You're always upbeat, smiling, optimistic. I don't know if you were just born with a smile on your face, but never seen you without one. Uh,
Well, you got to be excited, right? I mean, before I was in the pharmaceutical industry, so what could be more fun than working in your hobby every day? I
yeah,
mean, I feel like that's one reason why it's helped us being in South Dakota. You got a lot of people that say, "Hey, I love to hunt and shoot," and be able to
yeah,
work in a environment where I can work with people every day and help them do the same thing. It's fun.
yeah. Well, being your neighbor to the west here in Montana, uh, we share the same benefits, right?
Yeah.
Here in around Thanksgiving, our elk season has been open for quite a while by that point, and the question is, get your elk, get your elk. I'm sure new people who moved to town are like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Did you get any elk in your freezer? You're gonna get hungry this winter, and so it's by design that I moved to a place that has hunting and shooting and the outdoors as such a pastime as Montana does. I could have lived everywhere I wanted, but I grew up in a little town on the Canadian border in northern Minnesota where everybody hunted and fished and
Yeah.
trapped and did whatever. So I had to go to big city to go to college, and then had to do
Yeah.
the national CPA thing for a while to get my license. But I couldn't get back to a hunting and shooting environment quick enough.
Oh, yeah.
And
So I don't think I realized you were from Minnesota. What part?
up by International Falls. I say
Okay.
International Falls because nobody knows where Big Falls is. Even
Okay.
people in Minnesota don't know where Big Falls is. It's a wide spot on Highway 71 of I think now there's 175 people, and I tell folks the only reason you know where Big Falls is because you got lost and had to ask for directions, or you had to take a pee and you stopped at the campground there.
That's funny. No, that's so you probably know where I go wolf hunting then. It's, Lake of the Woods, it's Sunarrow, so it's not that
Oh
far
yeah,
right o yeah,
yeah. You probably cross at Badet
yeah,
and go.
yep,
I was
you're right.
born I was born in Badet.
Oh,
Uh,
really? Wow, yeah,
yeah,
that's where I crossed the border, yeah, it's
yeah.
I mean, I always say when I bring the wolves back over, the both the Canadians and the Americans, they're curious to see the wolves. They're like, "Oh, that's cool. We wanna see that. That sounds awesome." "We
Yeah,
just got 2 wolves this year. Let's check it out."
I am sure you get a lot of people at on the U.S. side of customs who are like, "Dang, I sure wish we could do that in Minnesota," because that part where I grew up,
Yeah,
northern Minnesota, wolves never left there. You know, they were endemic to that area, and growing up there were wolves all the time, and so I'm sure they're wishing that, dang, sure wish we could hunt these things again in
yeah, because
Minnesota. But
the Canadian the guides up there, they tell me they feel like when they get too much snow in Canada, they'll push back down into Minnesota, and of course,
oh, really?
they're not hunted there. There's no pressure, and then they'll come
Right?
back up. Yeah, it's
Okay.
interesting.
Huh.
Yeah,
Yeah, so anyhow, that's where I grew up, and
there we go.
I always said I was gonna move to Montana. I remember being a senior in high school, and some of us were sitting around, and you start talking about where you're gonna end up in life, and I said, I'm gonna move to Montana. My friends looked at me like I lost my mind or something, but
Yeah.
here
No,
I am.
Montana's great. Yeah, Montana's great. I mean, of course, I was born in Alabama, so when I told my parents I was moving to South Dakota, the look on their eyes, they thought I said Russia. I mean, they're like, "What? What did we do wrong? Why would you go to South Dakota?" They just looked at me like, "Oh my gosh, what have we done to our poor son to make him want to go that far away?"
Oh, well, I'm glad you're there. I'm glad that Silencer Central has become this voice and this leader that you have, and
Yeah,
in
it's been
not
fun.
just the shooting space, but your support for the conservation groups is remarkable. It means
Oh,
a lot to me. It means a lot to my audience that listens to this podcast to know that someone like you who loves to hunt and is committed to those groups, it means
yeah.
a lot to them. And so thanks for that.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I guess I would say that if there's anyone out there listening that does any type of nonprofit or conservation stuff, and they need us to donate suppressors, just call us. I mean, I think last year we did over $6 million in 100% donations. So if there's local conservation groups that want us to help with donating a silencer to help their local events, just call us. We got a guy that's all he does. They'll know on the switchboard exactly who to send you to. So
wow, that is generous. That poor guy, his phone is gonna ring when
I
50
know, I
when
know.
50,000 people hear this this
I
podcast,
know.
Brandon.
It's funny. The first year I hired him, I was like, I can't believe I'm paying somebody this much to give away silencers. I was like, that seems like an easy job.
Oh. Well, your phone is going to be ringing, or his phone is going to be ringing once this
That's good.
podcast
Yeah,
drops, which I'm glad you guys do that. That's one thing that is really interesting in the hunting and shooting space is how many I call them the founder legacy companies that really put a lot back into what we love. Just what you explained there is your vision, your idea, your commitment and investment in shooting and hunting.
yeah,
My partner's Nosler, family-owned business
yeah,
forever. They do the same thing.
yeah,
Leupold, family-owned business, do the same
yeah,
thing. And
yeah,
we are really blessed in the hunting and shooting space that we have so many generous businesses that try to reinvest
yeah.
in what
Johnny
we all
Morris,
love.
Bass Pro, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
Cabela's. Yep.
Yeah, you look at those and I think that makes us a little unique in the hunting and shooting space, whereas in a lot of other industries, the the accountants and their private equity groups have come in and taken over. Uh,
Yeah,
and I always say that whenever a brand starts falling apart, I say, "Oh, the accountants must have took over," and I can say that being an accountant.
That's
And
funny.
I always say that no good brand will survive more than 3 years with the accountants in charge. But no, it's it's great that you guys do that, and I appreciate you plugging that here
Yes,
at the
sir.
end. And I know a lot of people are going to take advantage
We
of that.
like it. It's good. That's how we get
Yeah,
our name out there and give back. So,
yeah. Well, Brandon, I really appreciate it.
yes, sir.
I look forward to maybe you and I sharing some time in the field here.
That'd be great.
I know I'm as busy as you are. My calendar gets pretty busy in the fall, but I think your calendar is that busy year round. And
Oh gosh, I hope not. I have a lady that manages it, and I tell her I try not to break anything in there. I let her tell me what I'm doing when. Yeah, because like I told you, the governor came this morning and she said, "Hey, you have a podcast at 10:30," and she's pulling me in, in here, which is perfect. It's good.
Oh, well, I know how busy you are, and you've already given us more than a couple hours of your time with prep and then recording here. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we
Uh,
appreciate the opportunity. Thanks so
yeah,
much.
I'm uh, I'm trying to figure out a way to get to South Dakota this summer. Maybe on my way back to Minnesota, drop
Yeah,
in. I'm talking to Joe as the possibility of doing that,
yeah, that'd be
and
great. We'd love to see you.
yeah, I'd love to see the operation
Oh
there.
yeah, you'd love it. We're
And
putting a big $20 million building next door. I mean, that's one reason why the governor came by this morning. Yeah, it's cool.
oh, really?
Yeah, it's nice.
Wow. Well, you guys are doing a great business, and you know the old saying that if you want to have a great business, just solve a lot of problems,
Yeah, it's a
and
good point. That's true.
the world will beat a path to your door, as they used to say. And
That's true.
you are. I'm volunteer number one for having this problem solved, albeit a little late, but I'm gonna preserve what I have, and my son, who has yet to, he still has all of his hearing. He's all excited because now that he's shooting suppressed, he's like, "You have no idea what a difference this makes." I'm like, "Yeah, I do."
That's perfect. That's good. That's good.
uh, well, Brandon, I'm gonna let you to
Thank you,
your
sir.
day. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I hope that I can bother you again for another
Anytime.
appearance here.
Yes, sir. Anytime.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Randy.